unknowing, or agnosia, is not ignorance or nascience as ordinarily understood, but rather the realization that no finite knowledge can fully know the infinite one, and that therefore it is only truly to be approached by agnosia. Taking us into the unknown today is Greg Kaminsky, author of Celestial Intelligences and Pronaos, Reflections on the Preliminary Practices of Buddhist Tantra from a Western Perspective. At roughly the 28-minute mark, there was an issue with Zoom. Tried to recover as quickly as possible, but you'll notice both an error in the video and the audio. My apologies.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone. I am joined today with Greg Kaminsky. Greg, welcome to the podcast. How's it going?
Very well, Augustine. It's great to be here. I'm really happy to see you today and talk with you about whatever you want.
Likewise, yeah. Thank you for taking the time out to do this. I appreciate it. For a while, I studied Stoicism, and one of the things that I have learned to appreciate more than anything is other people's time. So thank you again. I have where I wanted to start. I've done two other podcasts, and I never got in deep into people's personal history. But if you would be so kind, can you tell me, as far as your interest in esotericism, occultism, and things of that nature, where'd that begin for you?
Oh boy. If I'm honest, I think it began like when I was very, very young as a child. Um, so I can remember having dreams as a child that seemed really profoundly significant. And I didn't know why at the time. Dreams of like being led into like this forest path, dreams of all these texts that had arcane symbols that I couldn't read. And had these dreams over and over again, and it was very bizarre. And so I think that kind of set the stage a little bit. And then I can remember, I think one night when I was about 5 years old, I was playing outside after dinner, and for some reason, we were out really late because it was August. It must have been like 10, 11 o'clock at night. And I remember just laying back and looking up at the stars, and the sky for some reason was incredibly clear that night. And you could see everything. It was so amazing. And I had this bizarre sense that somehow what I was looking at was both incredibly vast and incredibly, I don't know what the other word would be, it was both vast and minuscule so much that it was like within us at the same time. And that didn't make any sense to me. And it just was like, what is this place? Like, what is going on here? But in a 5-year-old's mind, where it was just like this almost physical sense of wonder, like in your body.
Yeah.
And that stayed with me for a long, long time. And then I can remember when I was a child, well, like going into my teenage years, basically, my parents, we were raised Jewish, and my parents made me go to Hebrew school. And for some reason, they sent me to this synagogue where they were like Orthodox, but not like Hasidic. It was like,
Okay.
so there was no hats and payas and long coats, and everyone dressed normal and spoke English. But the practice, like the service and the religious observation, were very strict. Like the men and women didn't sit together in the Sabbath service, and there was no female rabbi or cantor or anything like that. nobody would even consider it at that point. And I can remember when I was turned 12 and I started training for the bar mitzvah, the teacher was this man, Rev Hammer. And Rev Hammer was a Auschwitz survivor.
Oh, gotcha.
And like you mean there was no doubt when you looked at him, you could see it. His body was just had been wrecked by this experience, and he always wore short sleeve shirts, and you could see the tattoo on his arm. And he was the most pious man I'd ever met in my life. But he told me before he went into the camp, he wasn't religious at all.
Oh,
But
wow.
when
Okay.
by the time he came out, everything had
Yeah.
changed, of course.
Yeah.
And so learning from him made a huge, like a very deep impression on me. And so I would study and practice for 1 to 3 hours every day for a year. And so it included like the Haftorah section, which is like the Torah reading for the week, but it also included like the entirety of the Sabbath service, all in Hebrew.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
And chanted like according to specific melodies. And so I had to learn and memorize basically all of that. And so I practiced every day for a year straight. And I didn't really have any way of knowing at that point what the effect of that was going to be. But again, it changes you when you do that much intense prayer, even if your intent is nothing more than to learn the prayer.
Right. Sure. Sure.
It's somehow, it has this imprinting effect upon the mind,
Right.
and it causes changes in activity and patterns and ways of thinking and behavior, sometimes subtle, sometimes not so subtle. But so that again was a kind of like just blew me out. And I
Well, and
did
that.
the whole
Oh,
service, and like that's the culmination of this whole thing. And yeah.
let me pause you real quick right there. Like,
Mhm.
and I forget the words, but um, would you compare that to there are verses in scripture that talk about and again, this is where I forget the words, the Urim and the Thummim,
Mhm.
the breastplate, like inscribing that on your heart, like just going over that again and again, like the way that we might compare that in modern neuroscience is making those grooves in your brain and everything, but I think, much like a lot of esotericists, that we conflate our brain with our mind, and obviously we conflate that with our heart, or maybe not conflate, but confuse that for our heart.
Yeah.
That it was an effect like that.
Yeah. So it definitely, I think you're onto it. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, it has a weird resonance, and I think anyone who's a Freemason or a
Mhm.
serious spiritual practitioner kind of understands what I'm getting at here.
Yeah, for sure.
And you do that intensely enough. And I think the fact that I was so young, I didn't have a lot of other life experiences of other things almost at all, really.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's just a 12-year-old, like babe in the woods, like no idea what's going on anywhere at all, just getting like blasted, daily with this. And so, yeah, it has a pretty profound impact. Um, so from there, I think, teenage years became like, there was like from 13 through probably 16 or 17, there was like this profound sense of like alienation and disconnection, and like there's got to be more to life than this. Just like none of this makes sense. Like everything seems inverted, or somehow people are totally hypocritical, two-faced, and sometimes they just don't have a choice, or they don't even know that they are, and like somehow like this this isn't the place I thought it was going to be.
Mm.
Basically just becoming more and more disillusioned. And then I think at like 17, 18, I had this weird sort of, I don't know how to express it really. It's just some kind of like vibrancy, vitality, like awakening of the mind and the body in a way that it's just really indescribable. But I became interested in music, like very intensely. I became interested in art, in literature, in psychedelics, sex, like all of the things that kind of like are able to transform your consciousness in a very quick way, like started to like really draw me in, and I became, fascinated by um stuff like uh the beat literature, the whole psychedelic movement into like the 60s, and the Grateful Dead, and then all of that. And then I think that kind of extended into college and then beyond. And then I think once I was out of college and working, I had a job in technology, and for a Fortune 500 company. And it was a good job on a, if we're judging, jobs, as far as jobs go, it was pretty good in terms of like responsibility and pay and all of that stuff. But I was really unfulfilled, and I felt this like tremendous like lack of meaning.
Mm.
Like it didn't make really any sense. I was like, what am I doing? Like, what is the purpose of all of this? Like, is it just to make money? Like, that seems stupid. I mean, on one level, you've got to survive, but like, if you're just surviving, like, is that it? Again, it became like, well, what are we doing here? This place doesn't make sense to me. How do I understand this in a way that allows me to live in harmony with it? Um, and so I started looking more deeply into shamanism, because I think that kind of was like the connection from like the whole psychedelic thing to somehow trying to find some wisdom in that, if there was any.
Yeah.
And yeah. So then I think at that point I decided I was going to actually try to do something rather than just read or research or, you know, have random experiences. And so I got some of this salvia divinorum,
Mm. Okay.
and it was like the concentrated herb, and I
Yeah.
smoked it. And I don't know, I can remember reading the instructions, and it was like, make sure you have someone with you to make sure, nothing happened. And I was like, I can't imagine having someone else here for the type of thing that I'm trying to do.
Right.
Because basically I was looking to the salvia divinorum as a way, as a method to help me understand reality and
Right. Sure.
myself, and like as some way to do that. I had no basis for thinking that would work. Um, So I lit some candles and said some prayers and kind of stated my intention as best I was able to articulate it, which wasn't really well at all in hindsight. And then you know, I sat on the couch and I smoked the salvia, and I had no idea what I was in for. I had a very weird sort of experience. It's completely indescribable. It was I felt like this in Kundalini sort of awakening
Hmm.
thing, and I had like a sort of out of body experience, but I was still in the room,
Right.
and it felt almost like my head had like split open on the top, like,
Yeah.
and I had like just come out the top, and I was like floating on the ceiling somehow while still feeling my body, which is very weird.
Right. Yeah.
And then it was almost as if my vision like quadrisected, so you had this sort of like effect. So you have like four quadrants of vision
Hmm.
happening. And then I started to hear this female voice, but I couldn't really understand what she was saying. And then I had this weird feeling like it's it's it was the feeling that I was, I don't know, this sounds crazy. If you're like standing in line to get on a roller coaster,
Hmm.
but you're also in the car that's of the roller coaster that's departing, like you're watching it and you're in the car and you're like taking off down the track, and then it somehow I came back into my body and the whole of it kind of stopped. And this was maybe a minute.
Okay. Yeah.
And then for the next week or two, I had this incredible feeling of peace and happiness, joy, bliss, a little bit of bliss. But at that point, I had to seriously consider that maybe that was the answer to my question. And
Right.
so then I began researching like Kundalini awakening, and then that, I think from there, that pretty much led me directly into like ancient religion, symbolism, occultism, alchemy, tarot, Freemasonry, magic, all of it at that
Mm.
point. And so I figured out that somehow what I'd experienced that night was, if it may not have been my purpose, like, but it was clearly like that your body contains some sort of wisdom that you have no idea what it even is
Right. Yeah.
or how to access it truly, but
Yeah.
it's there. And this effect like is somehow related to whatever our purpose is, and both my purpose and ours collectively as human beings.
Right. Right.
So that's kind of what I intuited from that, and just kind of moved forward. And then I think from there, kind of starting the podcast became like a natural extension, because it was like, okay, well, if this is your purpose, then you've got to actually extend yourself and try to learn more and experience more and actually understand, what all this is on a deeper level than just having a you know 1 minute experience that's kind of cryptic and confusing. And that all that work, the research, the reading, the you know grasping struggles at meditation practice, initial like struggling with ceremonial magic, looking at symbols and contemplating them for hours, and just like thinking about this over and over again and again, and trying to like find some way through it to understand it all. It had some very strange effects. Like, for one, I like had memories come back that I'd somehow like completely blocked out that were traumatic. And I don't know if you want to get into that at all, because it's probably somewhat tangential to our topic, but um that
Well,
was
that's
based.
that's that's up to you. If you want to share it,
Well, I'll
I
just mention it and you can decide if you want to talk more about it. It was basically
okay.
like this crazy UFO encounter where I saw something very close up, like within a couple 100 feet.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And then I completely blocked it out for years. And I think the only reason the memory came back at all was because I was doing all this meditation and studying occultism and magic and all this stuff. So it just is a, weird effect of like the whole thing. So
Right. Have you ever read Jacques Vallée?
a little bit, not
Okay.
the entirety of his books.
Yeah. Um, I've read pieces of Bridge to Patagonia, and you know, I don't know what I thought of the UFO experience before that, but after reading that book, it's sort of like how you just described the intelligence of the body, being something that we know so little about. Like that's I'm gonna stumble and ramble, but it's that's a whole nother kind of intelligence of, it seems to me this interfacing of both body, world, and mind, like some way like a glove fitting a hand, that I still want to understand a lot more.
Yeah, there's a lot to know there. Yeah, because basically when I saw it, like I was with someone else,
Mhm.
and I mean, they were looking at it, but even right afterwards, when I said, "What was that?" they said, "What was what?"
Okay. Yeah.
And it was close. I mean, it was really close. I mean, I could see details
Right.
that made me think this is some kind of technology. There are beings inside of this craft.
Right. Yeah.
And
Oh, that kind of close.
the
Okay.
detail was like tremendously intricate.
Yeah.
And then we went inside and she went to sleep, and I was having a lot of trouble falling asleep, obviously. And
Mm.
the last thing I was thinking to myself was like, I've got to tell somebody about this. And then immediately was like, I can't tell anybody about this.
Right.
And then I did fall asleep, and then I didn't remember it again for years, more than 10 years.
Yeah. Yeah, um just thinking about that, like, do you have any thoughts on why those things, I don't want to say get blocked because I don't know what the right word is, but why it is we lose access to those kinds of memories? I mean, is it a safety mechanism? Is it something we're just not in tune with, that we don't resonate with at the moment? Or any thoughts?
I don't know. I think it's just like a reaction to trauma or something that
Okay.
the mind cannot comprehend on such a fundamental level, where the physics of time and space like don't, like, when you see things that defy the laws of physics as you
Mhm.
understand them, it just melts your brain,
Right. Yeah.
basically.
Yeah.
Like
That's fair.
when I saw it, my mouth was hanging open
Mhm.
and I couldn't move. And even if I knew this thing was going to kill me, I wouldn't have been able to move. I was that stunned. It was literally stunned at what I was seeing.
Right. Okay.
So yeah, it was So I think that's really the root of it, is just it was too much for the mind to handle.
Mm.
There might have been other aspects to it that I don't remember. I'm certainly open to that idea.
Right,
You
right,
know, that might, I feel like I remember it all, but who knows?
right.
If the memory's that unreliable.
Yeah. Well, and like you said, like if there's something that's, that stopped that memory from occurring, or I think I'm repeating you, like what else have we not remembered about it? Right.
Yeah. So there's that too. And I think the other thing is like that both me and the other person who or saw it didn't remember seeing it or whatever. I think we both had like significant struggles, after that in our lives, in terms of like, just driving ourselves to distraction with like whatever, like work or drinking or drugs or relationships or whatever, to just kind of bury, I think what was just a traumatic kind of memory. It just,
Right.
because it nothing made sense about it. Like I couldn't just figure out, it's like, is this technology? Is this some kind of magic? Or are these like alien beings? Or did I have some kind of prophetic vision that was just completely technological in nature? Like, what the fuck is this?
Right. Yeah,
Excuse my
absolutely.
language, but
No, you're fine.
but you know, it, it calls for that kind of language.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. I guess maybe I'm going on about this a bit much, but it was that big of a deal
Yeah.
for me. Like if we're talking about my personal whatever,
Absolutely.
that somehow had a huge effect, because after that point, like I couldn't accept what, like, the consensus reality narrative anymore.
Hmm.
I mean, once I remembered it,
Right.
that was it. Like,
Yeah, for
I was
sure.
already into studying occultism and all this stuff, and realizing that there was no way to understand it without actually doing it.
Right.
And then having this memory pop back up in such vivid detail, that was the end. Like there's no more ordinary life after that. Like there,
Yeah.
nothing is ordinary. And I continue to question pretty much everything, because I think, and this kind of like advancing the story a bit, but once you kind of discover that the nature of reality is way more radically different than anything you could have ever expected, and what we're led to believe is so off base and wrong, well, you don't, you have to then question everything else.
Absolutely. Yeah.
but 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 almost nobody does. I mean,
Yeah.
even the people who are working to understand this radical nature of reality often don't question everything else. No problem.
Yeah. And just as we were getting at the heart of that, man.
Yeah, I was like,
Okay.
oh, did Zoom like intervene after? Because I was just going too far there, where I'm like, you have to question everything.
Yeah. The damn archons, man.
Yeah, that's pretty funny.
Yeah.
But I still say, you do have to question it all.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Um, you
But
know,
that extends to areas that people just don't want to go.
right, right. Give me so like sometimes I think that I even understand, that. But what do you mean? Like, what? Give me just one example of an area people don't want to go.
Well, what is something that almost everyone feels certain about? Just basic things that people feel certain they know, but they don't actually know.
Well, for one, I mean, the first one that comes to mind is death. You know,
Yeah.
um, it's one of those things where I I forget the online course I took, but I was taking a course on death and dying and things like that. And the instructor asks, "Do you know anybody that's dead? You know, did you see them?" Like, now, granted, I've seen coffins laid into earth, but in fairness, I can't be absolutely certain that that's the case. And that's a real literal sense of what they were talking about. But that's one of those places, I think.
Yeah, I think that's one. I think there's a lot. I mean, I think you can pick almost anything. Like, it doesn't even matter what it is. It can be scientific, it can be historical, it can involve, what we think about the world, nature,
Yeah.
animals, ourselves. Like, we think we know things, but and when I say know, I mean that we personally know, at least with our five senses as best we can,
Mhm.
that we could observe it, like we could see it or hear it or experience it ourselves and not rely on hearsay and
Yeah.
so-called experts to tell us the way things are, because the experts, well, in my experience, I've come to discover, don't know anything for the most part.
Right. Right. Well, and it's funny. When you were doing the Freedom Place podcast, one of the things that blew my mind was when you were talking to Rinpoche, and you got onto the conversation of light, and I remember prior to that conversation thinking that light was, and I'm going to mess up my words, but that's okay. I'll trip through them. Light was actually the light ray, it was a substance that wasn't clear. When I forget, it took me into a YouTube rabbit hole where I started taking flashlights out at night, in my backyard, and realizing that it's actually completely clear. And that sounds so trivial to just say. I know you probably get what I'm saying, but to hear me say it so poorly, it's like, wait a second, I can't see the light. I can now see what's in front of my face because of the light, but I can't see light. Like, that's ridiculous. And it was like, that's another one right there that's so simple. It's like, wow, what the hell, you
Yeah,
know?
that's a good one. For me, one of those things was just trying to understand moonlight,
Okay.
because we're taught that the moon reflects the sun, and
Mhm.
that's why it's luminous. And so theoretically, the sunlight is being reflected by the moon, and then that light is then hitting the earth, right?
Right, right.
So then when you actually, like, experiment with it and try to understand what it is you're observing, if you use a thermometer that can measure the temperature of a surface, if you measure the area that's exposed to the moonlight versus the area that's dark and not exposed to the moonlight, you'll find the area exposed to the moonlight's actually colder. Well, how's that possible? If
Right.
it's reflecting light from the sun, which we know is warm because we can feel that,
Yeah, yeah.
but the moonlight's slightly cooler. How's that make any sense? I can't understand that,
Right.
you know? So then it calls into question, like, well, what light is this? Is it really sunlight? I don't know. It doesn't seem to make sense to me.
Yeah,
Maybe
yeah.
I'm just, maybe I'm a simple man, but I'd like to, it's like, it's very non-intuitive. And to me, that's like, again, like, it's one of many sort of holes in the net of the narrative of reality, that you realize it's a lot more porous than we're led to believe.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, no doubt. Well, now I'm going to have to, and it's not for a lack of trust, but I'm going to need to perform this experiment because
Yeah, I would
it's
hope you do.
amazing.
I hope you get a
Yeah.
different result than me.
Absolutely. If I do, I'll share the result either way, but
Okay.
I'm curious to see now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So after you have that experience and that memory becomes unblocked, um, what next? Like, where does it go after that? Like, what did you start doing as a result of that to uncover some of the porousness of reality?
So I think I was doing the podcast for a while, and I remember at some point I started investigating local groups, around
Okay.
the Boston area where I lived at the time, and I joined this book club. They had it at the Theosophical Society in Boston, but it was a Western mysteries study group,
Okay.
and we read. It was based on people who were associated with Fraternitas Lux Occulta, the Fraternity of the Hidden Light,
Mhm.
which was a kind of, forgive the term, but derivative of Builders of the Adytum, the Paul Foster Case organization.
Mhm.
And so we read, like Paul Case's book on alchemy. I think was one of the first ones we really tackled in depth. I think it was called Esoteric Keys of Alchemy.
Right. Yeah, I remember the book.
And it's a sort of a spiritual alchemy, I guess you could term it.
Mhm.
And from there, we went into David Goddard's book on alchemy,
The Tower of Alchemy.
Tower of Alchemy.
Yeah.
And we both read and did the practices from this book. And I think it took me over a year, if I'm not mistaken. But I actually would wake up every morning and do the meditations, and eventually it grew into an entire ritual meditation session for an hour before I did anything else. And the results that I got from doing that were mind blowing, really.
Mhm.
And they were undeniable at that point. So it was at that point I was like, okay, this stuff works.
Right.
And it's having effects on me that I don't understand, but are really amazing in some ways. And so and again, I felt like it was, if I still couldn't understand reality in any way, but I could at least see that it wasn't what it was purported to be.
Okay.
And again, I had some really intense sort of mystical experiences through doing these practices.
Does that
um
like include visions and things of that nature?
no, it was I had one that was an auditory, I heard a voice that spoke to me.
Okay.
And then it startled me because I was like, who the fuck is that? Where's this voice coming from?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
It only said a few words, so it got its message across very quickly, because I think whatever it was, knew that I wasn't gonna be able to handle that one.
Yeah.
Um, and then, it started, the other thing that it started was this, and I couldn't for the life of me understand it at the time, but these sort of bliss states or Gnostic intoxication, which I'm often kind of reluctant to speak about, but now that, it is our path,
Mhm.
you and I,
Yeah.
I feel
Absolutely.
I guess I shouldn't hide it, because when it happened, I didn't know what the fuck was going on.
Right.
I was like, what, why am I feeling high all of a sudden? I haven't taken anything or drank anything. I'm not even doing the meditation right now. So that was really disconcerting, because it would happen hours and hours after the fact.
Right.
so I couldn't understand at all, like, what the fuck is going on. I just like randomly feeling high during the day or the evening, like, I don't know. And it just was a result, like like a byproduct of the spiritual practice. But come to find out, in Tantra, that is the method, is cultivating that. It's not the goal, but it's the method to get to the apophatic state, if you
Mm,
will. But I
right.
didn't know that at the time. I'm just
Yeah.
doing some meditations and wondering what the hell is going on. So that was confusing, but again, it was like, I just kind of intuited that, like, well, if I'm feeling this, something's happening and it feels good. And it didn't make me feel like hazy, confused, or lethargic or hungover. So I figured it's got to be a result of the practice somehow, and it must mean that I'm on the right track. I don't know.
Right.
Like, I don't know how else to interpret this. So that was kind of my, s- you know, less than an educated synopsis of what was going on. And then that kind of led me into studying the subtle body, studying like Taoist alchemy, trying to study um more like tantric Hindu practices. Um, and I think then after that, like, I met my wife and we got together. And then it wasn't long after we got together, I had this another kind of really radical, mystical kind of experience involving a mirror. And I don't really know how to describe it other than to say, like, it was one morning. I've been, I'm still doing the meditation and pretty intensively, not the Tower of Alchemy at this point, but just more
Mm,
like, it'd be like the pentagram ritual, middle pillar ritual, uh, sort of fountain breath
mm,
meditation, some prayers and things. And I can remember just one morning after I'd done all this meditation practices and looking in the mirror, and just, it was like, all of a sudden it was like, who is looking at who?
right.
Like,
Yeah.
I don't even know what's going on here anymore. And it led to this immediate sense of wonder and awe and perception that whatever all this is, is divine. It's not me. It's like, it's all whatever it is, and I'm just this node of perception and nothing more than that. Because there
Right.
was this weird, this is the other thing, it's hard to describe. There was this very weird kind of vision happening, even while my eyes were open, of this sort of bizarre, like, biomorphic landscape where, like, you could see like each node of perception
Right.
along this weird pathway, that whatever this was. And I don't know if that's just my mind trying to somehow conceptualize what the feelings I was feeling. I don't know what
Right.
it was. But then, how do you react to that type of thing? Like, I didn't know how to really react to that. It was intense, to the point where I was like, I couldn't do anything for like an hour after. Like, I literally couldn't say anything.
Gotcha.
And
Is it,
then,
would you compare that to like, so if you can think about, um, and I don't know what state your mind is in at any given moment, but like right now, as I'm perceiving reality, there's this feeling that appearance all like zooms to here and it stops at this brain that recognizes this, right? And is it wrong to associate, there's been a couple of times where there's a recognition that appearances literally just going on. Like it doesn't stop, at the back of my visual cortex anymore. Like there's a thing where it's like, this is just occurring through this. Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
it's through it. Yeah, but I think it's not. I think the origin point is here,
Okay. Okay.
and then it
Gotcha.
kind of comes. Yeah, I don't know. That's my.
Almost like an alchemical retort.
Well, in a sense, yeah, yeah.
Okay. Interesting.
I think there's probably a few retorts there, but
Yeah, fair. Okay.
yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to stop you.
No, that's all right. I'm not even sure where I was. That was pretty interesting what you were saying.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this too, because this is one of those things that I want. I was looking at the Chamber of Reflection archives, and they go back to 2010. You started the podcast before that, though, right? I remember listening.
Yeah, so it was 2006.
Okay.
So there's a page on the Chamber of Reflection website that's called Podcast Archives. And that has links to the audios from like 2006 to 2010 that are no longer on the main occultopersonality.net website.
Gotcha. So in 2006, podcasting is still not nearly as popular as it is today.
Total infancy. Yeah.
Right. What caused you to say, you know what, I'm going to start this podcast?
Okay, so at that point I was working from home again. It's just like cushy job at this Fortune 500 company. And I was starting to really get into listening to podcasts.
Okay.
And this is like 2004, 2005 is really when they hit my radar. And I can remember getting really, really into them. And this is at the same time I'm starting to study occultism and magic and Kabbalah and all of this. And I was like, well, why is there no podcast on this that I want to listen to? I mean, there was Thelema Coast to Coast.
Right. Yeah.
But that was strictly Thelemic. And at that point, my interest in Thelema was pretty tangential. And so I wanted something that was much broader, that would hit all of these subjects that I wanted to hear about, so I could learn about all of them. And I figured, well, if there isn't one I want to listen to it, I guess I got to do it.
Right.
It was one of those things where it's like, if you want it bad enough, you just got to make it happen. Right. And that's kind of what it was. I figured it's not entirely selfish, but like on some level, it was really so I could learn more about what I wanted to learn more about.
Right. Well, I mean, I get the idea of the self-serving aspect of it, but I for one think that the Western esoteric community owes you a debt of gratitude for doing it, because I remember being in that same place. Clearly, I didn't want it bad enough back then because I didn't start a podcast, but I remember listening to it and just, having my mind blown over and over again by, the people that you were interviewing and the things that you were talking about. And again, just this relishing this fact that finally somebody is putting out there what I want to hear,
Oh, thank you. I appreciate you saying that.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let me go in a little different direction. And I've heard on a couple of other shows that you've done interviews on, as well as in the introduction to celestial intelligences, that was your thesis. That was a master's thesis or doctoral? Master's. Okay. Yeah. And so you also mentioned that you had to narrow the scope of that, otherwise you wouldn't be able to do the thesis itself, right?
That's correct.
If you were to redo it now, or if you were to take a different avenue where you weren't doing it in that way, what do you think you would have included? Like, what else would have been in there?
Well, originally what I wanted to write about was really the sort of entirety of the Western esoteric tradition, like where we think it might have come from, or the different sources, how it all sort of fits together and the history of it.
Mm.
Uh, it was like like much more of a broad historical overview. But to be honest with you, if I was like, if I really wanted to explain like my main argument of it, I would really have to go back to the proposal that I wrote for that, because in doing the one that I actually wrote about, I've completely forgotten the other.
Ah, gotcha. Okay. Yeah. Um, there's in the book there, as I was reading it, you brought up Saint Bonaventure,
Mhm.
and I'm going to again horribly paraphrase for anybody that's watching or listening. Get Great's book. You can get it at Anathema Publishing still. Is that right?
Yes,
It's
that's
still
correct.
okay.
Mhm.
And I'm going to have links for it in the show notes. But in there, we read that Bonaventure looks at all things as signs of God. And we focus in on the fact that thoughts can be seen, and correct me where I'm mislabeling this, but thoughts might be seen as angels. Is that accurate?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Um, in Agrippa's 3 books, he talks about good angels and bad angels, or demons, if you like. And this is just my lack of familiarity with Bonaventure, but how would he deal with something like demons, or what we see as, like you were putting it earlier, the inversions of the world, the hypocrisies, like I've got my own thoughts about how these things that disturb us on a level that is almost unutterable, because it's hard to even put words on them, how they can bring us back to the divine, or they can act as signposts in and of themselves, because like you said, even with the podcast, it's like, it doesn't exist, let me make it. So I see this thing, I see X is horrible, and it doesn't sound like what I was promised, so let me try and find that road, maybe make another signpost. Am I
Yeah.
rambling?
No, no, I think I'm maybe looking kind of quizzical because I can't answer you in terms of Saint Bonaventure,
Okay.
unfortunately, but I could answer you in terms of like Rebbe Nachman of Breslov or the Baal Shem Tov from the Hasidic Kabbalistic tradition.
Yeah, by all means.
I mean, the Rebbe Nachman was really clear on this sort of thing. In because a lot he was the Rebbe. He wasn't just the teacher for the super esoteric Kabbalists. He was the teacher for everybody,
Right.
even though he was this incredible wisdom being. And he would say things like, if you need to kind of protect yourself from evil or bad thoughts, there's many things you can do. One is like try to replace it with a good thought,
Mm.
like just immediately try to like think a good thought instead of the bad thought. And he said
Right.
this could be seen as a like I think he described, again, I could be misremembering this, but I think, or conflating two different teachings, but I thought he talked about that, when we are like fighting against doing, like giving into behaviors that we know are wrong, or thinking things that we know we shouldn't be thinking, like that there's a, like when we engage in the combat of fighting against it, like actively working to think the good thought, or to supplant the bad activity with the good activity instead. It's like, when kings would have two beasts fighting, and the divine is always sort of rooting for the good, and it pleases the divine when
Mm.
we make the right choice and do the right thing. He also talked about, you can kind of shut up your senses if you feel like you're under assault from evil thoughts or evil appearances, whatever, where you could literally like kind of shut yourself up, like literally like close your eyes and put your hands over your face and like try to go within
Mhm.
to, and he said like, our natural reaction to pain is even to like close our eyes and like clench up so we're not open to it. Right. And he said like you can do the same thing with that which is detrimental or harmful, or like, these evil thoughts, these evil emotions, like we can seek refuge from them, and literally you're actually going to the divine, you're
Mm.
actually like crying out in a sense to the divine. You're trying to just shut off your senses and go within and just like really go into your heart and find the light there. Um, and there was another teaching, I think, where, each sort of fallen thought you have can be elevated. So I think, he gave different examples, like if you have a thought of lust, that is fallen from the world of beauty. And so
Right.
you can recognize that fallen nature and then elevate it back to like, rather than, "Ooh, I really want that," to becoming like, "Oh, I appreciate the beauty there," without needing to grasp at it, right?
Right. Yeah.
So it's that kind of thing, and like even anger could be sort of elevated to like some sort of righteousness, where you kind of try to purify the emotion through recognition of its original source. And even what this does is it lets us understand that everything comes from the divine, and it's
Mhm.
only our perception of it that makes it ultimately what we think it is.
Right.
It's sort of going back to like the rejection and the questioning of the consensus reality. Like you have to, because once you understand that all really is divinity, like that has to change how you feel and think and act
Right. Yeah.
and speak. Like if it doesn't, then you haven't actually understood it.
Yeah. Yeah. I was talking with a friend of mine who's from a Kagyu lineage who was telling me when he gets into fights with his wife, he has to constantly remind himself that his wife is a Dakini and that she's trying to impart wisdom, which, in our society and culture, that's seen as the man just listening to the woman. But like when you think about that, when you think about what's going on there, like if you're in an argument, if you're out of alignment with that person, there is something to be learned there. Whether it is the argument that's taking place or otherwise, and that's one of those interesting correlatives as you're speaking. I just wanted to share that with you.
No, it's true, and it's good because like our general nature is kind of abrasive. Like Freemasonry teaches this. Like we're rough ashlar when we start, right? We've got
Right.
all these sharp, rough edges and we don't fit well together with other stones. So
Right.
you have to
Yeah.
chip them off, right? You have to practice patience and perseverance and joyfulness and generosity and all of these things, and you really got to become sort of stable in that, in order to really be on the spiritual path, I think.
Right. Okay.
What do you think?
uh yeah, no, I like that. Um it was making me think, when I had gone through initiations in the Golden Dawn, they use very similar language, as I'm sure you're aware. And how does one find the balance between that? Like, what would you suggest, or what are your thoughts on the finding balance between that and being a doormat? You know, is that even a conversation that should be had there? Like, or does one become a doormat? Is that an option?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I mean, my instinct is to say don't be a doormat,
Right. Yeah.
but like circumstances are different, people are different, things like the situations are fluid.
Right. Sure.
right? So like in some instances, like one, the other person may be correct and you
Hmm.
may be wrong, and maybe
Right.
like doormat may be like a exaggeration, but like maybe you should submit and like recognize that what they're saying has some validity,
Hmm.
but there's other situations where you might be getting shit on and it's totally undeserved.
Right. Yeah.
So, and I think this is why, like, like for us, like having a guru or a master teacher who has the qualifications, authority, and wisdom to correct our behavior when
Hmm.
it's necessary becomes important, because that's like we have the one person who we look to as the final arbiter, and we try to act as if we treat everyone with that same reverence, but we do not accept the authority of anyone else in that way,
Right.
right?
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
So, for people like us, like we don't really have this question.
Yeah. Yeah. That's fair.
It means you accept how people treat you and you try to be kind and generous in the circumstance, but like being a doormat, like I don't know that that's called for.
Right.
Does
Yeah.
that make
In
sense?
our absolutely, and I think you're hitting something on the head. Again, in our case, and not speaking for everyone here, so long as it doesn't stop one from practicing dharma, then submit or give way. You know.
Yeah, and sometimes that submission can be part of the practice,
Right. Yeah. Good
right?
point.
And but I think, part of it is we can't really know that. Like that's why you have to rely on the wisdom being who could know that.
Right. Sure. Yeah, that makes
Um,
sense.
I don't know. I think ultimately a lot of it comes down to the fact that, like, if you recognize that when people are acting out of anger, it comes from a place of fear.
Mm,
When people are treating you as a lesser, it's because they feel inferior,
right.
right?
Yeah.
So, like again, if we look at like Rebbe Nachman's teachings, we can see that not only like these like poisonous emotions fall from a place of grace, but like some of them fall from a place of vulnerability, right? And fear and insecurity. So is everything good with your audio there?
Okay. Sorry. Could you hear me? Yeah.
Yeah, now I can.
Okay. Yeah, we're good to go again. I lost audio in my headphones for a second,
Oh,
but
sorry.
we're solid.
Where'd you lose me here?
We were talking about the submission also being a lesson.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's basically it can be.
Yeah.
And so, all of these things kind of, mostly when people are treating others badly, it comes from a place of vulnerability, fear, insecurity,
Right.
not from the fact that, I don't know, it's deserved or anything of the sort.
Right.
Uh, and sort of like accepting that with kindness and not returning it, with vengeance or some sort of reaction. That's part of the practice, right? Because we don't want
Yeah.
to poison ourselves with those same emotions just in reaction to it. We want to cultivate the light and be kind and generous and understanding. And so part of that is understanding, like, when we're feeling those feelings as a result of someone treating us that way. It's, you know, it's really the recognition of how things are more
Right.
than anything else. And so it's like it requires a perspective that that really doesn't indulge self-concern.
Right. Okay. That's fair.
Right? Because again, like you can be kind in the face of that, knowing that it's coming from a place of fear and insecurity and vulnerability. And you can also know that you don't want to engage in that because it's going to make you just as poisoned as the person who's dishing it out.
Right.
And I think more to the point, like once you understand like how reality is, again, like this idea that it is all divinity and we are sort of these nodes of perception, you can kind of let go any feelings of it being personal, because again, that's part of the delusion.
Right. And that, it's funny because um, I was thinking about posting this the other day because it literally occurred to me, this idea of taking refuge in any moment, because every moment is the divine, like every moment, may my mood be drawn towards practice, may my, mind be drawn towards wisdom, and everything is refuge in that sense, you
Totally.
know? Yeah.
Totally is. It's totally true. And I think, that may be difficult for people listening because the idea of refuge is not what we're actually describing to most conventional ears,
Right.
right?
Right.
What you're describing is non-refuge, right?
Yeah.
There's no
Yeah.
place to hide. There's nowhere to go,
Right. Yeah,
right?
except
Like
in the moment.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, we seek refuge in reality. Like, what
Right.
the fuck is that about?
Right. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
if you understand what reality actually is, it makes sense.
Yeah. Um, that brings me to another question that, I don't ever want to do like the Tim Ferriss style thing where I have my 4 questions that I repeat in every interview. But
Mm.
there's one that I hope to get at the heart with this podcast, right? And so that is right now I have 2 functioning definitions of wisdom, right? So I've got in my mind, in my training as a child, wisdom is the beginning, or the beginning of wisdom is the fear of the Lord. That's one place. And then I hear Socrates arguing with that, saying the beginning of wisdom is the definition of terms, right? How do you define wisdom? What's wisdom for you?
That's a good question. So for me, I think I'd have to say wisdom is the light of divinity that shines out in a variety of ways to bless, uplift us, grace us, teach us, and allow us to know the divine. And that's what wisdom is. And I know that's a really amorphous sort of definition, but if you, I'm trying to be very, very precise with my words here. So I say it again, it's the light of the divine that shines out in various ways and forms to teach us, bless us, and help us to know the divine. That's really what it is.
Gotcha. Okay.
I mean,
I
I don't
like
know if
that.
that makes
Yeah.
sense to you at this
It
point.
it does. It does. Because like we were just talking about with refuge, you know, various forms means that there are going to be times where I'm introduced to a wisdom I don't want to understand and yet kind of have to, you know. Um,
Yeah, I mean, it's hard because like it's it's hard. Human beings really learn through pain and hardship.
Right.
And seeing the truth of ourselves and the world is often very difficult.
Yeah.
Because it's, you know, it's the same old, you know. On one hand, there's the way we want it, and then the other, there's the way it is. And if you
Right.
don't live in accord with the way it is, you suffer. It's just that simple.
Yeah.
I wish
No,
it weren't that way, but that's just how it is. But in a sense, it's good because it means that if you do the work required to live in accord with reality, then you don't suffer.
right. Right. Yeah. It's much like what Rinpoche was saying last night about being a pure meritocracy. Reality is a pure meritocracy. Well, or the ending of suffering
Yeah, I
would
mean,
be.
you like, yeah, I said what you get out what you put in.
Yeah.
And but because of the self-lying, which is inherent,
Yeah.
we generally think we're putting in more than we really are.
Yeah. Yeah. I can only but laugh at that because if I think about the reality of it, it makes me a little sad, because I know I lie to myself all the time when it comes to that, you know.
Yeah,
Uh,
I'm sure, I know I do too, and I know I do in ways that I don't even know about.
right. Yeah. And that's the insidious part. Uh, um, Let me ask you one last question here, Greg.
Sure.
With the book Pronaos, again, I'm going to put a link for that one in the show notes.
Thank you.
Um, Absolutely. We have in there a description and an introduction to the work, and then we have the work. And in celestial intelligences, and I know one is your work versus you talking about somebody else's work.
Mhm.
How do you think Pico would have told someone to execute what it is he was talking about?
That's a good question. I don't actually think Pico knew how to execute what he was talking about.
Right. Yeah, I know in those last pages in your conclusion, you say that it stops at the theory that
Yeah, I
um,
think what we have here is I think what we have here, and I could be wrong, but it seems to me that Pico learned the Kabbalah, but he either didn't learn or just didn't really practice enough the methods of the schools that he was learning from.
mhm.
And I wasn't there. I don't know the specific situation, but it seems clear to me that, like, again, he was killed, so he died young, like 31, I think.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's possible, like, he was practicing and
Hmm.
trying to sort of learn these methods and develop and grow and transform into what he was talking about in his oration.
Mhm.
But we don't really actually see any evidence that he accomplished that. Um, and I don't see any specific evidence that he was actually trying to. You know what I mean? Like, even
Right.
in his later works, they're definitely not as exalted and this, like, true call to transcendence that the oration was, and that his whole 900 Theses project was. So I feel like, judging by what he wrote and the chronology of it, I don't think he was a practitioner in that way. I think he was a philosopher. I think he was, if there was any practice going on, it was contemplation that was more or less structured by him,
Hmm. Okay. Right.
right? Because he seems to know, like, the problem. He understands the problem, and he understands that there is a solution and that there's a way to get there, right? And he talks about it in very broad strokes, and he's totally on the money with it.
Yeah. Right.
But he doesn't tell you like how to actually do it on a day-to-day basis, right? It's similar to Christianity in that sense. Like Jesus in the scripture tells us the path,
Mhm.
but he doesn't tell you how to do it on a day-to-day basis, right? He just
Right.
gives you this sort of broad overview. Be this way, do this.
Yeah.
And yeah, but how, right?
Right.
Like, how do I just become that? I can't just become that. Like, I can pretend, but that's not gonna work in the long run.
Right.
Like, you can I think fake it till you make it is good in like small leaps. But if
Yeah.
you're talking about transformation of that level, I don't think fake it till you make it is possible.
Well, and you can
That's
also
like
make.
trying to
Oh, sorry.
fake being a brain surgeon, you know? Like, you think you're gonna pull that off?
Right. Right. And I was just going to add, you can also make dangerous interpretations. So, like if you read the Gospel of Thomas, there's that admonition: be like passersby. And I have related that to Gine. It's like, if I don't judge, if I'm just witnessing and being present, But again, how the hell do I know that's what they were talking about?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I get a different sense of it, which is like more of like the sort of like, be in the world, but not of it.
Right, right, fair. Yeah, it's a good point.
But also to be present in each moment with, and that sense of self-remembering, which is, as you know, is super difficult,
Yeah,
and we think we're doing it even when we're not doing it. We think we
yeah.
are, but we're really not. It's so crazy. It's like we're literally like ghosts walking around a lot of the time.
Yeah,
Like,
absolutely.
who's running this machine? There's nothing going on here.
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
nobody home.
It is literally that. That is a scare. Again, I laugh because I don't know what reaction to have, but it's fucking scary. You know, that's
It
a
is.
very scary thing.
It should be scary, but I don't think it's actually frightening enough to people on a visceral level that they would do anything about it.
Yeah,
Because doing something about it requires actually changing your entire life. And like, who's going to do that? Like, I did it once. Like, I don't even know if I could do it again, to be honest with you.
yeah,
It's that much of a upheaval.
right. Yeah, you know, I, uh, I make a solid attempt as a joke between my wife and I. I'm a good trier. and and all we can do is keep practicing and try and get at it.
Yes.
Uh, yeah. Well, I'm gonna leave it there. Greg, once again, thank you for your time.
Thank you,
Uh,
Augustine. It's really a
yeah,
pleasure to speak with you.
yeah, this has been a great conversation.
Thank you.
So if you're not already familiar with Greg Kaminsky, Greg is the host of Occult Personality. As I've mentioned, he is also the author of Pronaos. I don't remember the subtitle of Pronaos.
It is Reflections on the Preliminary Practices of Buddhist Tantra from a Western Perspective.
Thank you, Greg. As well, he's also written Celestial Intelligences. I'm going to have notes for those or links for those in the show notes.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Greg, if you want to share any other contact information or, let me also mention, and you can add to this if you like. Right now, Greg is hosting through Occulted Personality. If one becomes a member of Chamber Reflection, they can join the discussion group that we're having currently on meditations on the tarot, formerly by Anonymous. We now know it's Valentin Tomberg. We are up to the Chariot card right now. But if you'd like to add anything to that, Greg.
Yeah, I mean, it's really been an amazing study circle. I
Absolutely.
appreciate your participation, and it's just been tremendous. I've really wanted to study this book for years in a way that would allow me to access the text and its meaning more. And this is doing exactly what I'd hoped. I'm thrilled.
Yeah.
And Billy Hepper is hosting the actual meetings, and he's my co-host for the Occult to Personality podcast. So he's doing a great job with that.
Absolutely.
You can join at chamberofreflection.com. Just subscribe there, or you can sign up at our Patreon, patreon.com/occult to personality. My email is brothergreg@protonmail.com. If anybody wants to write to talk to me about, anything I've talked about in the interview here or any of the books. And I guess that's basically it. I really appreciate this, and I'm glad to speak with you, and it's really been fun. And
Likewise. Yeah. Thank you. All right. Well, Greg, you have a great rest of your day. I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thank you. Take care, Augustine.
Take care. Bye.
Okay. After we end the meeting, I'll wait for the audio to process, and then I'll just send you a link to it.
Okay, that works for me. Yeah, thank you. I'm gonna.
Oh, you want the video too, right?
Yeah. Can you? Is that okay?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
Oh, I don't know. I'm not sure which format you wanted it in. I did the speaker view.
Okay, that's fine. It's totally fine. I'm not so worried about that.
Okay.
I just like to have some kind of thing going on YouTube so that people can,
Cool.
listen along or watch
Awesome.
along or however. Yeah.
All right.
Greg, again, thank you so much. I appreciate it from the bottom of my heart. Yeah, this has been awesome.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely. All right, I'll talk to you soon.
Soon.
Yeah, I'll see you tomorrow.
All right. Have a good night.
You too. Bye.
Bye.